Welcome back, everybody. I'm Alexander Shelley, Music Director of Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra, and this is our third video on the basics of conducting technique. Great to see you all here again. Those of you who haven't seen video 2, I can recommend just having a quick look at the video where I talked about the basics of right-hand stick technique. Those of you that have, welcome back, and we're going to take our next step forward. During the course of this video, I'm going to talk about active and passive beats, about speeding up, slowing down, giving upbeats to people, and even stopping, which is very exciting as well. So I hope those of you who saw the last video have been practicing your smooth motions. We looked at 4 different beat patterns. Basic, which is 1, 1, and then we went through 2, and then 3, and then 4. Hopefully in that time you've managed to internalize a little bit these basic smooth motions, these outlines of the beat patterns that we're going to develop over the next few videos. Because what I'd like to introduce next is the wrist and the elbow, their function in our beat. Up until this point, we've been doing everything from the shoulder, from this first point in 3 down the arm. The elbow and the wrist can be used primarily for adding impulse to that smooth motion. So if we're in 3, 2, 3, all coming from the elbow, what we can decide to do is on the downbeat, add pulses like this. And they can come either from the elbow, like that, or just from the wrist, or they can come from both, like that. That will give us various options of the kinds of impulses we want to give on our beat. So just to clarify again, a smooth beat without impulses that's coming from the shoulder looks like this. If I introduce the elbow to that, I can start to move around this way. And if I introduce the wrists to that, I can also start to have more amplitude in the beat using that point in the arm as well. Now, what do I mean by active and passive beating? Well, a passive beat would be this, where we're giving no strong impulses to the orchestra. An active beat would be this, where we're using those points to give impulses to people who may want entries, or if we need to delineate the tempo a little bit more clearly. Exercises you can do to practice this are just taking that elbow, moving it up and down like that. Very simple, keeping this stable, the shoulder, and keeping the wrist stable, and alternatively taking the wrist and just moving it up and down like that. The wrist is a very effective tool for this, and it's useful also to think, as we did in our last video, about subdivisions. An 8th note, 1 and 1 and 1 and, or a 16th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or even a 32nd, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, just to practice different speeds of control in the wrist. You can do that by, again, making the elbow and the shoulder stable and just moving from the wrist. It's useful to practice that independently. It's useful also to practice, as I just did, 8th notes, 16th notes, 30 seconds, or really fast ones if you want to develop it further. And that will work in conjunction with the elbow as we talk now about active and passive beats. Why do we need active and passive beats apart from what I just mentioned? In upbeats, one of the most fundamental things a conductor can do, it's very, very useful to have this control. You may want sometimes to give 2 beats as a preparatory indication for an orchestra. So we're starting, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Mary had a little lamb. Let's say we do it in 2. You might want to go 1 and Mary had a little lamb. The alternative would be just give 1 beat and Mary had. But if we're going to give 2, we would do 1 passive beat and 1 active beat. Passive, active. So you can see on the active beat, I'm using my wrist to flick. In that case, I went up. In other cases, you could go down. So when we're talking about the upbeat, what is important in it? What are the fundamentals of an upbeat? Well, you need to make sure that the up and down movement, this one movement that we practiced in our initial video about right-hand stick technique, that it is exactly in the tempo that you wish to continue in. So let's just stick with Mary Had a Little Lamb for a minute. If you want Mary had a little lamb. So what I'm clicking with my left hand is our beat of 1 quarter note. Then you need to make sure that the indication you give as an upbeat is precisely in that tempo. What are good ways to practice this? Well, subdivision is useful. When we say Mary has a little lamb, each of those beats, the syllables of the text are coming on eighth notes. So Mary had, that's the big beat, Mary had. And the syllables are eighth notes, Mary had. If you imagine subdividing in those syllables as you go up and down, Mary ha, Mary ha, Mary ha. Then you have a clear and even upbeat, and anybody watching it in the orchestra will understand the subdivisions. If you think back to what I said about one, in this context, the R of R in Mary is the top plane, and the M is the bottom. Mary ha, Mary ha. And it's useful to think of it in those very simplistic terms so that you can practice the movement at any tempo. It could be Mary had or Mary had if you're giving a very slow upbeat. So that's point one. We need to have control over the speed of this movement. Point two, in an upbeat, you're going to be indicating to the musicians the kind of attack they're going to be giving you. If it's Mary, you don't need to add much impulse. Ma. If you imagine making that sound with your hand, the M is soft. Ma. If you want to say Mary with a hard M, you might go like that. If you said the first word had a K, you might want to go, if you want to have a sharp attack. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm varying the amount of wrist I use. So let's give a sharp impulse. It would look like this. A softer impulse would be like this. And no impulse would look like this. We're going to add those three movements to the up and down. So no impulse, up, down. Small impulse, up, down. Big impulse, up, down. In each case, we keep this speed of motion the same, and we change the attack that you'll get from the musicians by including more impulse. That is the building block of any upbeat. Certain sections, like woodwind sections, if they're playing a chord together, they will often need a clear beginning to the note from you. So you'd need to give a little bit of an impulse from the wrist again. And ba. And ba. If you leave out the impulse, for woodwinds who are going to be speaking through an instrument or for the brass, it's slightly less easy to define exactly where the point of attack is. For strings, if they're playing a chord that is soft edge, leaving out the attack is not so much of a problem. In fact, if you have strings playing a very piano passage, you can just do a amorphous indication with your left hand. You'll get a beautiful, subtle sound. But at the core of everything that we do in the upbeats, we need to marry up this with the impulse. The dynamic of the upbeat will be indicated by the amplitude. So as I mentioned in the last video, the distance between the planes. If you want to have a really loud entry, you might start down here, right up to here, and down again, like this. And Mary. And Mary. If you want it soft, you reduce the amplitude, take out a little bit of the impulse. Mary. Those are the basics of giving an upbeat. To go back to the idea of active and passive beats, if you're beating through a bar and at the end of the bar you want to give an upbeat, make sure that you don't have multiple impulses. Let's say you're giving an entire 4/4 bar as a pre-beat for a bar. So the next downbeat someone's going to play and you go 1, 2, 3, upbeat, play. If you want to give yourself a whole bar of preparation, it's fundamental to remember not to give impulses on each of those beats. Musicians, any of us in an orchestra or an ensemble, will instinctively want to play when we see an impulse. I'll show you the difference. If we're giving 4 preparatory beats, if you do this for an ensemble, each of those looks like a moment to play. If you do this, it's clear that the last of those beats is the one where we go. Now what did I do? All I did was add this impulse for the wrist. So be aware, please, of using active and passive impulses. An exercise for this also within a bar would be simply saying I'm going to do passive, active, passive, active, passive, active, passive, active. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see I'm only using my wrist on the 4th and the 2nd beats. I can swap that round to 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. And that's a good exercise to do so that you can control in the bar when you're giving active or passive indications. This will be useful when you're giving entries to people. So, speeding up and slowing down. If you've been practicing this basic element that we talked about the smooth planes and the outline, the axes of our conducting technique, this shouldn't be too difficult. Because basically, speeding up and slowing down is a controlled way of literally speeding up and slowing down your beat. That's how you do it. You'd say we're in 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, with the subdivisions 3 and 4, and then what we do is slowly in our minds speed up those subdivisions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 so on. There I kept the amplitude of the beat pretty consistent to indicate that we're not getting louder or softer, we're just getting faster. I could do it the other way around, slowing down from a fast tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and so on and so forth until finally I end up in a tempo that's very, very slow. That's the basic mechanics of how we speed up and slow down. Of course, you may sometimes need to add impulse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And the more impulse you give, the more attention you'll be demanding from the musicians. The same in slowing down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. An impulse from the wrist and from the elbow is something demonstrative. It's saying, in your stick technique, it's saying, please look at me, I need your attention because we're doing something differently to what you expected. So adding impulse can be more demonstrative as you speed up and slow down, but the mechanics remain the same. It's a useful exercise for you when you're practicing your beat to think rigorously about a metronome getting quicker and slower in your head. Again, like I did before, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on and so forth up to a very fast tempo and then starting fast and slowing down again. You can challenge yourself by going up and down and making sure that this really feels natural as you do so. It'll then be very clear for the orchestra when you indicate it. Stopping with the right hand is also something I'd like to talk about in this video. There will be many occasions where we use the left hand to cut an orchestra off, but it's also useful to get used to the feeling of doing that with your right hand. There are different ways to indicate a cutoff with your right hand. Let's take, for example, a cutoff on the 4th beat of a bar. So 1, 2, 3, and then cutting off here. If we have this simple plane that we've been working with, any gesture that is literally looks like a cut for the orchestra when they see in their music that they're supposed to stop will work. 1, 2, 3, cut. And you'll see I'm giving a little impulse, a clear moment where everybody should stop. 1, 2, 3, off. I pull away from the plane that we've been working on. I could make that a sharper cut. 1, 2, 3, off. I can make it a softer cut. 1, 2, 3. And both of those gestures and anything in between them will indicate the type of ending of a note that an orchestra will give. You can also do that on any other beat. So 1, off. 1, 2, off. But each time there's a touching of this conceptual plane that we have and a moving away from it. The moving in towards the body is also useful. If you want something to soften, moving towards the body is useful. If you want something to strengthen, you can cut away. So 1, 2, cut off strongly. 1, 2, cut off softly. And the same on each and every beat. So those are some new ideas to add to what we covered in the first video. It's a good idea before we see each other in our next video to internalize and practice some of these gestures because we're going to be building on them as we go along. And the less you have to think about what we've done before, the better. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been useful to you, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.